questions, I realize that you don't know a ton about us, but take your best guess. First one, out of the three speakers that were introduced, Nicole, Trenika, or myself, which one of us is of Jewish ancestry?
I can tell you that we've had Colón. So Kristie, you've gotten a lot of responses. Trenika has actually gotten a few, and someone said it could be any of you.
That's true.
But it looks like Kristie, you've gotten the most responses.
Okay. Next one. We'll tell you the answers at the end. Which speaker has siblings that each have a different father?
I'm seeing, let's see. So Nicole, you have a lot of responses. A couple of it could be any's, but Nicole is getting a lot of them. Kristie, you've gotten two. They're popping up so fast. Plus, I'm getting the notifications too.
That's totally fine. Okay, we'll go on to the next one. Which speaker lived in Argentina for 6 weeks while on summer break in college?
Got Trenika has gotten one. Trenika again. Let's see. Nicole. It's a tie between Trenika and Nicole right now.
All right, we'll go ahead and spill the beans, and then we'll move on. So, my family has Jewish ancestry. Nicole was the second one, so siblings that each have a different father, and Trenika was the one who spent 6 weeks on a summer break in Argentina. And I'll let Trenika kind of take it from here.
So my goal today of the presentation, I'm going to kind of talk to you about barriers, and I will say that by people's responses, you didn't fall for the setup that we tried to do to you by giving you, we gave you some questions that could be very stereotypical. Right, as far as what we think about other people. And, maybe some of you were surprised by the answers, but the way that we learn these interesting differences, right? So I was 6 weeks in Argentina, which I did 6 weeks one summer in pharmacy school. I did another 2.5 another summer, because my thought was I'll be a pharmacist forever. And so who'll get this, will I ever get that opportunity again? You can find those interesting things out about people if you just, introduce yourself and have a conversation. So with barriers, my kind of sub point was that yes, they do exist, but we must just admit that they exist, and then acknowledge that, and then overcome them. So next slide. Okay, so there are a lot of different barriers to allyship, right? And this isn't just I'm on the playground, let me go make a friend, right? Allyship is way more than that. It's let's get together and actually get some things done and provide support to one another. And so backgrounds and identities are one of the major differences that we have. And you see that with Kristie and Nicole and I, there's some things just by looks you could probably determine there might be some differences with us, especially with race and ethnicity. But in addition to race and ethnicity, some background differences are Nicole is married with two very beautiful children who I call my nieces and nephews. And, you have Kristie, who's more newly married with two really great dogs that I see on every call that we have with Zoom. And then I am not married. There are no children, and there are no dogs or animals of any kind. So we have just those different lifestyles in themselves, which obviously are going to kind of direct our paths on a daily basis. And then even geographical things. So as you heard, Kristie's lived a little bit of everywhere, versus I'm not going too far away from the Mason-Dixie line. I am a Southerner through and through. I'm a Mississippian, but what I love about Nicole, who's lived in Kentucky and Ohio, is she understands that green beans need bacon or ham hock. So we have those types of things, that we'll have in common as well. So there might be those differences, but we can easily overcome them. Those cultural background identities are obviously going to impact our perspectives on life and how we, are going to approach a problem. And then it's also going to kind of impact our communication styles. And I think that's one thing that's very interesting out of the three of us. So if we want to discuss something, Kristie's going to send you a Teams. It's going to be short, and it's going to say what it needs to say. Also, she's more of our, while she's communication director, she's more of our social media queen, versus I don't even have a social media account. And then you have Nicole, who will send you a very informative email where you don't need to ask additional questions about it. And then that Southern person in me, I'd rather just pick up the phone, have a call with you, or go to your office. And I think for Kristie, she had to really learn to deal with that because that's not her style, but she just said that's Trenika and that's the way she's going to get things done. And probably something that's just fun about communication styles, just even how we communicate within ourselves. So the first couple of times I met Kristie, I can remember going into her office and being amazed and slightly terrified at all the post-it notes that she had everywhere. So they're multicolored, they're everywhere, and that's the way she has her to-do list. And in my very type A pharmacist mind, all I can think is, what if the wind? Now, what wind is going to be in the College of Pharmacy building? I don't know, but there could be a wind that blows all those wonderfully placed post-it notes everywhere. And then what would I do with my life? Versus I'm the person that I have that very neatly placed checklist with a box so I can specifically check off things day to day. And sometimes I'll spice it up and I'll actually put something on my phone or use something electronically. And that bridges also into kind of our personalities where we're all a little bit different. And with it being the holiday season, the best way to kind of express our personalities is, let's say Kristie, Nicole, and I were all working for Santa. And, we're trying to help get, toys delivered and all those things and help with productivity. Kristie's going to help Santa learn how to advertise his business and to better, and show the improvements that they had from last year. Nicole's going to make sure that Santa is well hydrated and has a snack. And in addition to that, she's going to talk to the elves and make sure that they feel encouraged with their work. I'm probably going to use a lot of sense of humor to keep everybody's energy up. And when it comes to making the list and checking it twice, I will definitely be checking that list twice and asking Santa to have a rubric to help determine how is the child going to be naughty or nice. With our college roles, we already talked about that a little bit, but that's one of the things that makes things great, because you have Kristie that's going to be in the dean's office and specifically with our communications director. So FYI, if you love our slides, thank Kristie Colón for that. And then you have, Nicole Keenan, who's in student and academic affairs that really focuses on, student wellness and success. And so isn't that a really great niche, to add to that? Nicole is going to really have boots on the ground with what our students need versus, Kristie's just going to have a general overview of what's going on with the College of Pharmacy, and then a really great connection to administration. And then for me, because I'm a faculty member, but specifically in my role as Assistant Dean for Diversity and Inclusion, my goal is to ensure that everyone feels respected and valued, and that includes everybody from students, faculty, and staff. And I need to be in touch with all those people that do my department. With those roles, that's going to help us move into our various spheres of influence. So this is one of the really great things about allyship, because everybody brings not only your talents, but in addition to your talents, you're bringing your group of people, right? Your crew, right? And so with that, even though when I'm speaking by myself, my voice may be low or muted, but when you adding Nicole and Kristie alone, that voice becomes stronger. But then when I add Nicole's group and my group and Kristie's group, it is a voice that's too powerful to be denied. And so we're really able to get things accomplished due to our spheres of influence. So even though you see that we have these differences, we can't be afraid to approach them, and learn about them and use them to our advantage. And something I just have to quote, because I'm a Maya Angelou fan, I always will be, to kind of help us think about differences. She has this really great poem called Human Family, and I would tell you to read it. But the last part of that poem is she says, I note the obvious differences between each sort and type, but we are more alike, my friends, than we are unalike. We are more alike, my friends, than we are unalike. We are more alike, my friends, than we are unalike. So when you get together, you'll find out that you have a lot of things alike. And for us, we all have this passion for people, this passion for people to be heard and respected and valued. And we really love making change. So it's a great impact when we all get together. Some additional barriers beyond our personal differences, I thought about structural barriers, and those structural barriers can be both physical and invisible, and I'll talk about both. So our biggest physical barrier, so you're seeing a picture of our building, and it is a beautiful building at the College Pharmacy. Don't get me wrong, I love it, but it is a beautiful building that's built upon silos. So when you come into that on the first floor and you look to your right, you'll see the Student and Academic Affairs office, and that houses Nicole Keenan. And at certain times of day, you need a badge with special access to get into there. And then if you go up the flight of stairs, and FYI, it's not one flight, it's at least a flight and a half, in my opinion. You're going to go to the right and you'll see the Dean Suite. And in that suite, that's going to house, Kristie Colón, again, that takes a special badge to get in there. And on down the floor, on second floor, down the line, you'll see that's where my office is. So it really is conceivable that we could have been around each other for years and never known each other just because of the way that our building is designed. And then additional kind of barriers that we have in our building alone is I'm in pharmacy practice and science. We're all on the second floor. Third and fourth floors are pharmaceutical sciences, which is our other department. And so easily, again, that's a great barrier between even our departments from working, and we're seeing even within our different staff groups as well. Our more invisible structure, and I'm saying invisible, we all know these structural barriers exist. And as I kind of read them, so I'm going to talk about individual and institutional ones. You don't have to call yourself out, but if you've thought it, said it, or heard it, you can be brave and say it in the chat, say an amen. Again, I'm a Southerner, or raise your hand or things like that with these. But these are some barriers that kind of go on that people don't always see. So some individual ones are that we say sometimes, well, I work in this physical space, so this is my area, right? So that's the only thing I need to worry about is my area and people who are within that area. Well, my specific role is this. So if we are not having the same type of job, then I don't need to know you, right? We don't need to get together. Or these are my colleagues. So this is my group, right? Chris can say, well, all I need to talk to are the people that are in the Dean Suite. Or Nicole can say, oh, the only people I really need to talk to are the people that are with Student Academic Affairs. Or I can be very specific and say not just faculty, but pharmacy practice and science faculty members. Or if their job, their hurt, their pain, their problem, their issue doesn't impact me, then I don't need to be involved with that. And let's think about how untrue that is, because we don't get things done without allies. It requires that. And we're seeing that more and more. And this year is such a great example of that. Some institutional things, and these are the ones where, again, you don't have to admit it, but you've heard it. This is the Women X conference. I know you have. And you don't have to nod your head. You can roll your eyes with these in particular. But, some things have always been this way, right? So why would I need to make a change? And not only have they always been this way, they work best this way. And I just sometimes want to know who decided what best was or how things should be, because I've generally found that the best or what has always been doesn't help me in particular, right? And then I also added the great divide. And yes, I put divide in all caps because I wanted to really spring out on the screen, because we know there are divisions. And if we don't admit that they exist, then we can't ever overcome them. And what are those divides, especially in academia? Faculty and staff. I wouldn't know that there were faculty and staff divides if I didn't have really great staff friends and colleagues. Okay, there's a divide. Some faculty feel that they are above staff. There's a divide between maybe even where various staff work, right? So sometimes it's, considered maybe you're higher level if you work in the dean's office versus if you work in in finance, and we need everybody there. There are divisions among departments. There are divisions among junior and senior faculty. There's obviously the administrative ivory tower type of division with everyone else. So we have all of these divisions that we have to overcome. And then with our students, they're just impacted by all of these, right? And so, it's our job. Yes, there's a wall, but we can push through it. And maybe I can't push through it on my own, but surely if all of us work together, we can get it done. When we think about all these barriers, so we talked about the many personal barriers, the structural ones, the physical ones that we deal with, the invisible ones that we deal with, and we go, okay, we're going to go through this, we're going to overcome them, and we're going to really create allies throughout not only our colleges, but throughout the university. We then begin to realize, especially when those I don't want to change people come up, that man, we're in some uncharted waters. And specifically, the uncharted waters that we really dealt with within our college was we didn't really have cross communication systems. So I knew what was happening in pharmacy practice and science, but I couldn't tell you anything that was going on in pharmaceutical sciences. And between, I'm quite sure that, the dean's office probably couldn't tell you as much that was going on in student and academic affairs and so on. So we really didn't have a good way to communicate with one another. And you'll see that Kristie will talk about some of the solutions that she helped kind of devise for us. There really was a lack of awareness of what the global needs were, right? So, I have my individual needs and people just don't know. They don't know that, hey, this would really make my workplace better or more inclusive. And that comes back to the communications issues that we have as well. But if a person has an unmet need, it's really hard to be satisfied with your work. And if you're not satisfied, you're not going to be as productive. There were many unheard voices, and I know that we all feel that and understand that. And guess what, though? Those unheard voices probably have some amazing things to say and things that could really make our institution better. And so we had to find a way to help those voices feel heard. And when they're heard, that what they're saying actually matters. So there's an additional step to that. And then for us at our college, underrepresented was truly underrepresented. Okay. So, and there are a lot, so I have such a respect for the word diversity because there's so many things encompassed by that. And I love the way we're all different and it just makes the world a more beautiful place and a more productive place when we embrace those differences. But when I think about some of our major underrepresented areas within our college, one especially is race and ethnicity. And when you're part of an underrepresented group, or if you want to say, be even more specific and say an underrepresented minority, what happens is, let's say that we decide to do a survey and you want to say, I feel like we actually did this. I feel that we are culturally diverse, right, within the college. Well, if you're one of two, right, people of color, you're going to say, strongly disagree, right? That's what you're going to say on that. But if you have if you're predominantly of the majority, some people are really going to look and say, I think we're doing great. And so when you look at the results of that, they're going to be very skewed. And so it requires you working along with your allies. They're going to be like, hey, I hear what you're saying. I'm going to say I strongly disagree as well. And our final barrier, once we said to identify and acknowledge, and then we need to go to overcome. The final thing that we really do have to overcome is fear, because it's difficult to go into put yourself in a position where someone might not want to talk to you, or may not want to be your ally, or maybe not want to connect. That's a very vulnerable position to be in. However, you don't really know until you try. And so fear can't be overcome until it's faced. So I also added someone must be willing to take the first step. And in my mind, when I look at all the people who are currently on this presentation, why can't it be each of you? So now I'm going to pass it off to the amazing Kristie Colón.
That was a great intro. Thanks for getting us started. So picking up where Trenika left off, I do think fear is definitely a big barrier. And I would say it's also an indicator that you're heading in the right direction. And so the best way to embrace that is feel it and then do it anyway. So when I think about some of the things that we've done at the College of Pharmacy when I first started, when I was interviewed, so my job title is External Relations and Alumni Affairs. And the first question that the dean asked me in an interview was, how would you go about recruiting diverse students? And I was like, well, I'm not in enrollment management. But I said, well, I think first of all, you get really honest about where you're at right now, which is that we're not really diverse and we're not really in a great place to be that inclusive. And then he hired me. And so I would say that getting honest and understanding where you're at is the first start. And so when you look at all your barriers, it's going to take persistence and creativity and then action. So there's not really one right way to do this, which is part of what I love, but can also be a little overwhelming. So the stories that I'm going to talk about are just things that we've done in the college, and there may be pieces that work for you that you can grab and use, but it's not the only way to work through this. So we talked about communication and how not a lot of voices were being heard. So one of the things that we did is we started figuring out, well, where's everyone going for their information? How does everyone want to be communicated with? What platform should we be using? So we have a texting platform that we use with our students and some alumni. We use Instagram a lot, Instagram stories to do a lot of check-ins. We started on Teams probably 2 years ago now, because that worked for some people better. Me being one of them, because I was getting inundated with emails, and so I'd have 400 unread emails and not know what an emergency was. And so Teams was better for short and quick communication. And we started really looking at who's where are they getting info, and where are we being redundant, and how can we get better at that? So one of those things was a weekly letter from the dean. And so it's called This Week at COP. And we had something like this that was coming from our facilities person. So here are the parking updates, here's what's going on in IT, this person's having a birthday, but it wasn't really catching everything that was happening in the college. So actually when COVID hit, we did kind of a pivot, and the dean said, we really need to figure out how we're going to keep community and communication happening while no one's in the building. And so we sat down over Zoom and talked about, okay, well, what's happening? Who has questions? What are people scared of right now? And we created basically a format for putting together a weekly email that was personalized. So you'll see in the slide, it says Dear First Name. And so we have the ability to put in everybody's first name. It was transparent. It was timely. So whenever we got an email, say from President Capilouto, we would turn around and put out basically what that meant for us. So when there was talk about budget cuts, what does that mean for the College of Pharmacy? When we were talking about vaccines and all of that, well, what does that mean for our college? And are we participating in giving vaccines? And then it was authentic. So our dean talked about, his own struggle of like, how do I figure out what my workday looks like now that there's not really this line of work and home life? What happens when I get stressed, when I get frustrated? And I think this is one thing that really helped us pull together as a community, even though none of us were in the building. And so when we were in the building, one of the things that we did around community, because we are so siloed, and I swear our building was built by introverts, because because everyone has a door and they all close. And so you're walking down the hall and you're like, I don't actually know if anyone's in here. And so the dean really wanted us to be able to all come together. And what better way to come together than around food? So once a quarter, pre-COVID, we would get together and have an all college meal. And yes, a lot of people tend to sit with the people that they know already, and that's normal and it's comfortable for people. And there wasn't a huge push to, well, let's make sure everybody mingles. But as everyone comes down, you can't help but sort of get in line with someone and say, oh, who are you? And it slowly but surely does open up the dialogue. And it's really everybody. So it's facilities, it's faculty, staff, students, it's anyone who is in our building at the time of lunch. And we also invite folks over from pharmacy at UK Healthcare. So when we talk about community, it's something that we are very intentional about at the College of Pharmacy. And then what did we do when COVID hit? So we spent some time thinking, okay, well, now none of us are in the building, and a lot of what we do happens organically. Trenika will stop in my office, make fun of my Post-it notes, and then we'll talk about a strategy, and that was not really happening. And so how do we keep communication lines going and still keep the sense of community? So one thing we did was, again, we looked at platforms that we could use. We found we used Typeform, which is what this is from. And when we were doing when there was a big push for masks, one of the things that we were hearing from folks is they didn't want to feel like they kept getting in trouble for not doing the right thing. And so we flipped that and said, okay, well, how can we make wearing your mask and participating in these healthy behaviors actually fun and worthwhile, and not sort of this annoying thing that it can become? And how do we also promote self-care? Because I don't know if you all remember at the beginning of COVID, but it was not great, and it was really stressful. And so we picked some things that we felt like would be some really good self-care for folks. It was around the time when people were registering to vote or having their absentee ballot. So we just kind of put in like, what are ways and creative ways that people can take care of themselves right now? And then, or you could just take a photo of yourself wearing your mask, and then you could submit that through the form. And then if we got 75% participation for 4 weeks of this, then everyone got free insomnia cookies that were individually wrapped. So that ended, and we're due those cookies, but since we're having a spike, we won't be touching that till February. But that's one example of something that we sort of did that was creative and fun. And same with, we have a horse in our atrium, that big blue horse up there. And so we hosted a contest, again, with our alumni and our students of like, what should we name the horse? And then we'll be doing sort of a what is that, March Madness bracket for the names that come through. So is this all absolutely necessary? Is it academically pushing us forward? I would say yes, because you work so much better when you know that you're supported. And so why some of these things can feel like, well, do we really have the money to put towards an all-college meal? And the argument that I would give, and that our dean would also give, is how much more expensive is it to recruit an employee who for a position that they've quit? Whereas you can just spend this money and you can elevate the experience someone has and really bring our community together. So when I also think about one of the things that I did when I first started at the College of Pharmacy was there were meetings happening all around me. Someone hadn't been in my position for a little bit, and there were meetings I saw that were happening. I was like, oh, I should probably be there. And I remember telling a colleague of mine who was like, I wasn't really invited to this meeting. And I was like, oh, I just go to meetings. I just show up. And so I was literally inviting myself to the table. And I'm not saying that everyone has to do that. And that is definitely a very sort of individualistic type of approach. And that is culturally not going to work for everybody. But in terms of the concepts, how can you make sure that when you're at a table, you're speaking for people who are not there and making sure to include them, and you're advocating for them, or that you're also advocating for yourself? So like as a woman of color, being in the dean's suite, working with our dean, with our associate dean, saying, this is a great piece that you've written, but like it needs to be read by other people with different views. And so again, there are many ways to do this, but I do think it's an important part to really, wherever you fall in the spectrum, using that privilege that you have to advocate not only for yourself, but for others. And then also looking at what are the common problems that we all have, and then how can we look at solving them? And so one thing that came up for us when we were thinking about diversity, inclusion, equity work was, well, what's in our curriculum? And the answer was, we don't know. And so I was talking to the dean one day, and I said, we really need to get a hold on what folks are teaching. We're in a healthcare college. We don't know really what's being included in our students are going to have many diverse patients, and in our like how do we know? How are we doing? Like, we're doing a disservice to our students if we're not showing how healthcare can be inclusive. And he said, do you want to fix this problem quickly? Or do you want to do it well? And I said, well, I want to do both. And he's like, how labor intensive do you want to be? And I said, well, whatever it takes. So he said, well, if you want to do this well and you want to do it fast, use the summer, interview every teaching faculty. So I remember thinking, why is the communications person doing interviews of our faculty about what they're teaching? But I realized that that's kind of how this stuff works. That if you really care and you're really, and it's important to you, that there are ways to kind of be involved in these things. And it may seem random, but it does come back to other stuff that I worked on. So I actually worked with our assessment guru, Bria, who's in charge of all our curriculum mapping. And both she and I sat down with all of our faculty who teach and went through a survey with them and asked them some basic questions. So, do you discuss how cultural or religious holidays or practices may impact patient care or the workplace? Do you discuss the relevance of cultural diversity in healthcare or research? Do you have students address their own attitudes or perceptions? And you'll see that there's yes, no, and other. And that other was, I don't really know. This is kind of what we do. What do you think? And I will definitely give credit to our faculty who were very, very vulnerable in these interviews, and who basically said, I want to do this, but I don't know how to do it well, and I'm terrified of doing it wrong. And so that really helped us in terms of the task force, in terms of what we were thinking around DEI work, to figure out that there wasn't really resistance around this stuff in terms of, I don't want to do this and I think it's wrong. It's, I don't want to mess up and I don't have the tools that I need. And so when we asked, would you like additional training around diversity and inclusion, I believe it was something like 80% of our faculty said yes. And some of them had ideas and others were like, I don't know, like whatever you tell me to do. And it was a really great jumping off point for our college to say, okay, now that we have all of this information, we can do something with it. And I think that's kind of where the breakthroughs come in, because when you sort of bridge these problems and start filling these gaps, you start to see where you can head to next. So, Nicole, passing it over to you.
Thank you so much, Kristie. What a privilege it is to be with you all today. And one of the things that I want to share in this next series of slides are actually some of the breakthroughs that we've been a part of in the college. And so I want to share that with you. But another thing that I want to share in thinking about our Assistant Dean of Diversity and Inclusion and our External Relations Communications Director, Kristie, is that when I think about the two of them and my relationship with them and what we're able to do in the college, immediately what comes to my mind is that it only takes a spark to get a fire going. And I share that with you because there are countless conversations that have been in my office. There have been countless times where we've come together to talk about frustrations, what these barriers are. But the part that really makes a difference is, what are we going to do about it? And so looking at what does our voice mean? How can we get our voices heard so that we can actually make some steps to have a more inclusive environment? And so some of the things that I want to share with you that we've been able to do in regard to communication, there's so many things. And this is probably one of my favorite areas to think about, especially as I work with students and all the things that needed to happen. But we identified who are the people that you can go to when there's a problem. Okay, that sounds so simple, but I have to tell you all, we hadn't done that. There were key people that students would go to, and those students would go to us, but then there was no system to help us follow through or follow up with what was happening. And so that communication piece was an integral part of where we are as a breakthrough. Some of the other things that we were able to do and thinking about that is not only do we identify who those people are, but we let our community know. And so now when you look at our website, when you look at any information that we have, our personal intranet that we use as a community, you can know what is that system, where do we go, how do we follow up, and we have a crisis plan that we follow through. Another thing that we do, and our colleague Bria is on the line. Thank you, Bria, for coming. But we have monthly meetings with our students to ask them, how are things going and what do we need to change? And the great thing about that is it doesn't just stop there with one person. We're able to send that information out to our faculty and to our support services to say, here are some things that students are currently struggling with, because they are our priority. They're the reason we do what we do. And so making sure that we listen is an important piece. Some other things is what Kristie had described, identifying how people communicate and what are the best ways to do that. And I can tell you that a huge thing that's made a big impact on us this year is to text our students. And it can be as simple as, how are you doing today? Send me an emoji to let me know, to give us a temperature of what our community is looking like and how those community members are, how they're doing in the day. Some other things that we've been able to do is create a Facebook group, and that is to promote the events and trainings that are not only in our building, but actually external trainings that are on campus. And really, this is a place of learning and listening and connecting. And so it's a safe place where people can share information, but also see that information. Especially social media is so important to many of us, so we can see it and not miss out on opportunities that we may usually only see on an email. Kristie brought up a great point, and I think the breakthrough in thinking about our weekly communication is that there's a loop where if you want to provide information, you can provide information. Also, it doesn't just stop with, it's not just for our faculty and for our staff, it's for our students as well. So the whole community gets the same newsletter. And I think that that's a big breakthrough in making sure that everyone's getting the same information and we know what's happening. Going back to that slide on the crisis plan, this is actually, I think, the biggest breakthrough of my life and things that I've just really appreciated. I remember Kristie coming into my office and going, hey, Nicole, what do we do when there's a crisis? And I was like, well, I have to usually call a lot of people and get this moving. And so Kristie was able to really sit down with me and say, let's build a plan, and then let's communicate that plan. And so we've had faculty meetings where we've shared this plan. This is on our intranet, so our community members can go to it if there's ever a doubt of who to go to. But basically, what we've been able to identify is a process in which we would make sure that needs are being met, especially if there's an impact on our community that may adversely not only impact our community, but the entire university. And so some goals of this is just an incident response, not having that bystander experience. So, is there a place where people can report? Who was it reported to? And did that person make the reports that needed to happen? These were things that were easily overlooked and assumptions being made. So being able to develop that process, identify those key people has been huge for us. And you all, we have had several instances that have gone viral in our college. Instances where students have had situations, and before we know it, it has been that spark that turns into the fire. And so we're able to get on top of those things. I have access to texting, calling our dean to let our dean know if there's a student issue. I am that domain contact. Then students come to me, and then I'm able to report those channels and then bring that communication loop back in. And so I think this has been a huge aspect. Going on to community, some of the things that we've also been able to do, simple things, like think about the way we communicate meetings. And so we've been able to community. This is an all college event. This is an all college meeting. Everyone is welcome. And so thinking about our language. Another thing that I think has been key in developing a community, and it's simple, but I'll tell you what, we love our coffee and we love our tea. And so we have a place in the Dean Suite where we can go and grab coffee and grab tea from our dean and have conversations. And as Trenika mentioned at the beginning of this, one of the best ways to become an ally is to build the rapport and build relationships. And so that venue was, I think, a very important process for us to be able to be together in a space and have a conversation. And although we miss that space right now, I think one of the other elements that we have utilized and been utilizing for quite some time is our teams. And so that's something where I can, I may not have a meeting with Kristie, but I can send her a quick message. I can send her documents. I can send her the information that's needed in regard to projects that we're working on. And so I've got about 20 Teams channels with information and files. And so that's been a very critical part of that community and being able to work together. We also are working on a strategic plan currently, and there is a community domain, and that domain, the goal of it is to create a framework for substantial positive growth and inclusion in our college. And so I am very happy to share with you that I'm on that committee, and it is such a pleasure to work with my colleagues and identifying the barriers and being a part of the action that will take place in the future to really help this process. Another thing that I think is important in thinking about community is our students just recently formed a Diversity and Inclusion Alliance for Pharmacy Professionals organization. And so that is a new organization to our college, but again, just an area where we can build community and have voices that hear and work towards the goal to have an environment that's inclusive. So some of the things in education, we believe that pharmacy education is, it must reflect diverse patient populations that students will encounter in practice. So this is something that we need to be thinking about and talking about and learning, not only from each other, but what to expect when those students go out into practice. And so we're committed to work to the tolerance and building the empathy necessary to meet that goal. And so a lot of things have been addressed in our education, as Kristie outlined with our curriculum mapping, but also a part of that was you all just looking at the cases that we were providing to students and making sure that our cases had, had culturally inclusive and diverse patient issues, so that students would have that experience prior to going out into the field. Also, education and literacy. We can't say enough about that. All of our programming, we're thinking through that filter of that diversity inclusion. What are we learning? What can this speaker say in regard to an inclusive environment and what that experience has been like for them? And so that can take place in our town halls, our convocations, and also our orientation programming that we do. Our website. We have had a major uplift, facelift with our website, thanks to Kristie and our IT team, and all of the resources are available where students can access and see what some of those educational opportunities would be, and then also how to request it, which I think is important. We aspire to be diverse, but I have to tell you, we've had to take a hard look at what's keeping us from becoming diverse. And so in thinking about that important population that we have, one of a huge thing that we did in 2019 was to eliminate the PCAT. This was a barrier for a lot of our students financially, and so we were able to take a look at that, develop a more holistic approach to that process and eliminate barriers so that we could make sure that we could identify all of our best prospects in the College of Pharmacy. In addition to that, we recently had a town hall with our Black students, and those students came forward with voices to say, we need to work on our diversity. And so some of the ways that we've been able to do that was to establish a scholarship that would only go to our Black and sorry, I have a hard time saying this word, Indigenous people of color, and establish an effort to address that. And the most amazing thing about this is that this scholarship is in honor of the first female pharmacist in Kentucky, Harriet Beecher Stowe Marble. She actually had a pharmacy that was on North Broadway. And so that scholarship has been named for her, and will go to our Black students who, again, to make sure that we're working towards a diverse population. And again, taking out those barriers. When we move on to advocacy, I think one of the things that I can share with you is that it is all of our, it is for all of us, and all of us have a voice, and we can be an influencer. As a staff member, I'm invited to the table to advocate for our students, not only in an academic setting, but also in their leadership and also in practice. And so that is such a privilege for me to be able to do that. But we also need to look at ways that we can unite together. And so this picture, I think, is a beautiful picture that illustrates our healthcare students at the University of Kentucky and our healthcare teams coming together, our UK healthcare teams coming together to recognize racism as a public health crisis. And so this event was to show commitment to social justice and to encourage allyship together, and so that we could take action and we could push for change. And so I'm happy to share with you that some of these efforts and thinking about not only our community and our external community, but we have a leadership that has allocated resources to make sure that we have advocacy. And so one of the things that I'll share with you is that in 2017, we had initiated a diversity and inclusion task force. And this was members of our community, practitioners, students, faculty, to really help take a look at our barriers and to come up with solutions to those barriers. In 2018, our very own Trenika Mitchell was appointed to the Assistant Dean position for Diversity and Inclusion. And in that position, she's been appointed to our Executive Council, our highest council at our college, to make decisions, to think about all of the efforts in the college. Every decision that needs to be made comes to that team. And so she's a member of that team and can provide a very strong voice. Trenika also has been appointed to the UK DEI leadership team, and that's to also accelerate the Black and diverse communities on our campus. And that's an important thing to mention, because now that we've got an advocate like Trenika that's appointed to this role, she's also appointed to so many other committees, and we're learning about resources and knowledge about things that are going on campus that sometimes even siloed in colleges, we don't always get that information. So that's something she's been able to bring back to our community. And thinking about what it looks like for accountability, I want to just mention a few things to you. This is just a list, and we do post this list on our website as some things that have been some changes for diversity and inclusion. Some of that has been focus groups established. Trenika and Kristie have established focus groups and worked with our students to, again, identify barriers and think about ways of improvement. Some big changes just even in our building, and it's a subtle change, but it's made such a big difference for our community, is even our signage and what things look like for our restrooms, like having, inclusive and accessible bathrooms, and being able to share that to our communities, that this is a safe space. We've worked to close the communication loop. That was a big issue for us, not knowing like whatever happened about that situation. And so we've been able to provide some quick feedback about what has been done when we are working on a problem. Also, having a diversity and inclusion statement in our application for our new hires. Cultural competency is a component of our PharmD interview process. There are questions about that, so we can find out really, as we think about and engage with prospective students, what are they saying? And then the unconscious bias training and cultural competency, all of that is mandatory for our community, for our students. And it's not just something we do every 4 years, but something we're starting to implement every year now in our program. When I think about the breakthroughs, some of the things that we've talked a lot about is to recognize that we're not there yet. And I think this is so important to think about and consider. But what I can tell you is that we strive each day to listen, and that's important, and to grow. We have a willingness and understanding that failure is a necessary part of this. Sometimes it takes our failures to realize what we need to do and how we need to make a change. But I can tell you that we are encouraged by our leadership to think big. We are encouraged not to be afraid of failing, but to rather be afraid of not trying. And that is something that I take with me every day when I think about our students and how to help our students is, did I try? Did I listen? And am I also growing from this experience? And so that is our presentation. And we have some questions for you that we'd like to ask.
We want to just kind of encourage everybody, because I know we've given you a lot of information. These are things that we've done specific to our college, but it doesn't mean that you can't implement those things, some of these things where you work, or you may need to do some very different things. And FYI, if you come up with an amazing idea, feel free to email us, because we will steal it and we will use it, okay? And that's also,
we will borrow it.
We will borrow.
We will borrow.
That's true. We will borrow, but not give it back. But, so, I think, part of these, when we all get together, right, again, we come up with these really great ideas. And so our kind of push to all of you is to become a change agent as well, and one who is active. So our encouragement, some homework that we're giving all of you is to identify some of the barriers in your department or college, wherever you may work, and then find an ally. And, it just starts with that conversation of, hey, this is my name, who are you? And, let's sit here, kind of find the things. Yeah, there are differences, but again, remember, we are more alike than we are unalike. So, let's find these things we're both passionate about and work together. And then, really just asking yourself, who are my bridge people? And there are way more people than you think that they are. And then finally, determine what you can accomplish together. And just don't be afraid to try, because again, with one voice, right, it's hard to get things done. But when there are a lot of voices, it's really hard to ignore that.